It is live. I'll hop on real fast. Hello again, everyone. We'll wait for folks to trickle on in. If you'd like to and feel so obliged, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box. We will be monitoring that again to make sure that we get all of the questions that are coming in, but we're going to go ahead and encourage you to keep your questions in the Q&A so that we can see them, as there are a ton of you out there. And I am going to go off camera, and we'll start in about two or so minutes. Oh, and another quick thing, for those of you who have reached out about the remote platform not working, we're going to go ahead or having issues logging in on the remote platform, we're going to go ahead and move that to Zoom. And so we will put that in the system so it'll automatically do that for you. And we'll make another announcement about that towards the end of the session, but just go ahead and note that the rest of the sessions will be on Zoom versus the remote platform. I feel like there should be music or something.
Yeah, we see that there's a lot of action happening in the chat box, a lot of hellos. Hello from Golden, Colorado, Springfield, Austin, Texas, Denver, Washington State, Seattle.
France? Did I see France? Wow. What time is it there? Is it?
We're giving it just a few, I think another minute or two to get started. But welcome everyone. Right now you should be hearing my voice and seeing the wonderful faces of our panelists and some folks that are working this session. If you can also just give me, like a yes, you can hear our voices. Yay, I see, you only see me, okay. If you do have any technical issues, feel free to drop them in the question box. And we have a team of folks working behind the scenes to make sure that everything is working properly and that you are getting the best session experience you could get. All right. I think we'll give it maybe one more minute. Does that sound good, Ozzy?
Yes. Is it in speaker view for everyone? You can see the four?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Okay, great. I am getting confirmation that people can hear and see us. And if you have any, again, technical difficulties, please let us know. We do have live transcripts available. We just dropped the link in. If you have any issues with accessibility accessing that link, again, please let us know. And we'll be happy to make sure that you have everything that you need. So we will go ahead and get started. Hello, Pennsylvania Black Librarians Caucus. I'm glad you are here. My name is Laura Tadena. I will be today's session moderator, and I will be moderating out of Austin, Texas. So hey, Texans, that are also experiencing this heat. And during our session, we will again have folks moderating the chat box as well as the Q&A box. We will also be recording questions. So if you do have questions that you would like to ask our panelists, please drop them in the question and answer box, and we will be collecting them in a Google Doc that we will use towards the end of the session to help build in those questions and ask them to our panelists. But we are mindful of time, so we will try to get through the 5 questions that we have prepared, and then as well as getting to some of the questions that you have through the session. I also want to note that we will be using progressive stacking. If this is a new concept for you, or if you need a reminder, progressive stacking is a technique used to give groups, marginalized group, a greater chance to speak. So we are asking that if you would like to self-identify as being a person of color, to use an asterisk in front of your question, and we will make sure to prioritize those questions. And let's see what else. So again, the link to the captions are available in the chat box, and you know, feel free to ask questions and be as active as you'd like. If you would like to tweet about the symposium, we are using the hashtag DPL Symposium and hashtag Workplace Racial Equity Symposium. Okay, and so with that, I'll go ahead and begin. Again, my name is Laura Tadena. I use she, her, hers pronouns. In our session today for Equity and Crisis Response Workshop, we have Regan Byrd, Sandie Coutts, and Celesté Martinez. And before we begin, do you all just want to say a quick hello?
Hi, my name is Regan. I use she, her pronouns. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And excited to have a talk about equity and what we can do regarding a lot of different kind of crises and things that are going on. So thank you all for joining.
Hi, I'll go. Yeah. Go ahead, Celeste.
Hi there, my name is Celesté Martinez. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. Awesome to see folks from all the places I grew up, Santa Cruz, California, and but I'm based here in Denver. Excited for this conversation.
Thank you. Sandie Coutts, I'm local, Jefferson County Public Library. I am an immigrant, spent most of my life overseas, so beyond thrilled to be here today and part of this conversation, buzzing with excitement to see what questions you have, and excited to learn more from you and from the other panelists. So yay, we're here and we're doing this. This is awesome.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize, Celeste, I mispronounced your name at the beginning. So I will make sure to say it correctly moving forward. So we do have a set of preset questions, and we can go ahead and begin. So the first question is, how does and will COVID-19 impact organizational equity efforts?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, I think, first of all, the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic, it definitely impacts our equity efforts. And I think like what I'm noticing is a few different types of reactions since I'm connected to various organizations. There's this initial reaction of like, well, the work is really important and we need to keep doing everything that we've already been doing. The second reaction I'm seeing is like, what is possible in this time? And the third reaction that I'm seeing is what is needed. And I think that there is a combination between all of those different reactions at this time that's really needed. And as I shared like in the pre-recorded video, I've really been sitting with this question, this quote by Grace Lee Boggs of, we have to reimagine everything. Grace Lee Boggs was an incredible activist from Detroit. And the reason why I bring that up is I think that this moment around our equity work is really inviting us to reimagine what is possible and how to do our work in a way that doesn't fully exploit people or expect them in this traumatic state of what we are experiencing, whether that is with the pandemic of COVID-19, the uprising that we're seeing in defense of Black lives, and everything else in between that long existed before. It's allowing us to actually reimagine and ask the question, what do our people need? and how can we work together in a way that's actually more sustainable. And so I would just say, to kind of conclude my thought, I would invite folks that see yourselves kind of moving at the same pace as you were before. Why are you holding on to that? And have you taken the time to really connect with your people and ask them what they need in order to thrive at this time?
I would like to echo what Celesté said as well about the pandemic has revealed, you know, nationally, statewide, locally, how many of our systems are not working. The inability for systems that work alongside each other to kind of collaborate. Like there's a lot of concern about, there's a conversation happening about opening workplaces that is completely disconnected from schools opening and whether working parents are able to have where their children are going to be going or what childcare is going to look like. Meanwhile, other businesses or organizational hours are being formed as well. So I continue, there are a bunch of marginalized groups or groups who from an equity standpoint have additional resource concerns and considerations that I see just kind of screaming into the wind and still are not being heard. And folks with disabilities are another group of folks. So this move to remote work and, oh, we're just gonna do everything through like these visual different mediums, and folks aren't thinking about how hearing impaired or visually impaired folks are able to access some of those things. So there's a lot of communities being left behind, and it's because there's like this, I believe that there's kind of this anxiety driven rush to this back to normal, where the conversation we need to be having as a society is we need to pause and take a deep breath, because normal is gone. Normal is gone. And we are now tasked with building a new and better normal that not only addresses the pandemic, but addresses, let's make some systems that actually work. I was thinking about this other day to be like, our workplaces and organizations have been sources of trauma and violence and anxiety for a long time. And now now we have the ability to actually take a step back and think about what would it mean to have whole folks be able to bring their entire selves to a workplace, for folks not to be marginalized within the workplace or societies. Now is the time to think about that. So that's the kind of level of equity and the layers of analysis that I think we now need to step to. It's less about corporate profits. It's less about getting over some public relations hump, and it's more about, hey, what if we actually stopped harming people coming into our workplaces or interacting with our organizations?
Yes, I'm just absorbing everything that you're saying, and the things that I would add would be, you know, from the organizational perspective, we have these groups of employees, you know, who are a microcosm of the communities that we serve, and they're looking to us. And right now we're seeing organizations being impacted financially, right? Some organizations, catastrophic financial impact because of COVID-19, and of course that's then going to impact your ability to meet your goals. Are you still putting your money in the right places, right? Are you being tempted to put important work on a back burner because suddenly everything has become urgent and the focus becomes physical safety, when in fact right now I say the most important thing we can do for our employees, for our workforce, is focus on psychological safety, right? We see unraveling all around us the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on our communities, and that's coming into our workplaces too. So I think about the well-being and the mental health of our employees, and I wonder about us putting our resources there. Like, how are we supporting people? How are we looking at a workforce that suddenly has become mostly a remote workforce, right? Who may already have been, you know, suffering from those diseases of despair, you know, loneliness and isolation, and think about the things that were already going on in people's lives that were stressful and how they've been exacerbated, and how morale and productivity suffers because of that. So I think we have an opportunity to, I love that word, reimagine, you know, our role as an employer and this group of people that we're supporting, in terms of mental health, in terms of remote working, and creating that sense of belonging for them, creating agency, making sure that we've got programs in place to help mitigate the financial impacts of what's going on for them, the psychological impacts. You know, are we beefing up our DEI work? Are we beefing up our mental health supports for staff? Are we allowing ourselves to focus too much on crisis response and losing strategy, like not losing sight of the reason that we exist, the goals that we have, making sure that we're embedding the equity work into those strategies, into those long-term goals, and keeping equity at the center. Like, don't lose sight of what we're trying to achieve here, because we have this unique opportunity to rethink it and do it better. And also this large group of people depending on us to support them through this stressful time in their lives.
Absolutely. Can you, and actually we're going to take a step back, can you briefly describe your roles and your background, and just, you know, a little bit about the work that you do and how it relates to equity and inclusion and diversity, especially around crisis?
And you want that from each of us?
Yeah.
So yes, I am. So again, I'm Regan Byrd, and I'm an anti-oppression speaker, trainer, activist, and consultant. And I do diversity, equity, inclusion consulting through an anti-oppression lens. And when it comes to crisis specifically, I try to help organizations think through what groups are being marginalized or are further at risk or targeted in the middle of a crisis. Therefore, who do you need to be focusing resources and efforts on? What risks do crises pose into organizational operations, things that will not work now that we're in a different kind of time economy, and then also how do we have conversations about how to adjust those things, rebuild things. It's really like a lot of this is like a strategic planning process. You have to kind of back the organizational view up and look at things like that. So I'm here to present an overall diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-oppression perspective, but also things organizations need to be cognizant of as we're in not just one crisis, but like we're not even naming what crises are we in. So we're in the middle of like a global resurgence of white nationalism, fascism, the climate crisis, the pandemic. So I'm just like, I just think it's amazing how, you know, and I'll end here, is just that we need to really sit with, when we say crisis, like how broad or how narrow, are you just thinking of your organizational budgetary crisis, or are you thinking about the society that your organization is within and all of the crises that your community and your employees are really having to deal with in their daily lives? So even the broad definition of crisis, I think, is important here.
And Celeste, would you mind going next?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Celesté Martinez. I'm the founder and owner of Celesté Alegría, Igniting Joy Through Transformation. Through my consulting business, I offer an array of services, including coaching, facilitation, organizational development, and training programs, as well as curriculum development. And so, you know, a lot of my approach to crisis work in particular, one is, I think, arises quite a bit in my one-on-one coaching, which is in service of women of color, especially Chicana and Latina identifying, queer, trans people of color, as well as organizers of color. A lot of my background has been in community organizing over the past decade. I've worked in various roles through local nonprofits here in our Denver community, from, you know, policy reform to, you know, creating networks that help us to respond to moments of crisis. And so I think, you know, as Regan was saying, like, it's really important first for us to be clear about what crisis are we addressing, and how are we trying to respond to it. You know, when I thought about this panel, it reminded me actually of some work that I did with the Colorado Rapid Response Network that was birthed out of really the vision of undocumented folks in our community, saying, like, there's so much ICE activity and violence that's impacting us. how can we know that it's really ICE and what's really happening, and then be able to use that to organize in ways that continues to protect our rights and our dignity. And I'm really grateful that I had a role in being able to, you know, respond to that. And I think that when we consider equity work, sometimes we think of that as like just DEI trainings and things that need to be set aside for our time. But I would invite us to think about equity work as a mindset, right? Like, how do we want to really meet people where they are as our staff, as our community, and really listen? And are we making informed decisions about how then that shows up in the culture of our organization? So, you know, a lot of my touch on this, not just, you know, the racial equity training and characteristics of white supremacy and confronting anti-Blackness programs that I run, but I also, you know, really embody this equity framework in everything that I do, so that way folks' needs are met and people can really thrive and live joyfully.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. So who am I? Sandie Coutts. I'm the Director of People and Culture for the Jefferson County Public Library System. I've been in this position for about 8 years, so I do set the strategic direction for everything you would associate with people operations. So I work with the people who take care of the most important stuff, right? For me, our most important asset is the one that goes home at night, and actually right now is working from home. So I oversee all the things associated with HR. I also oversee the social work program and the volunteer program. And organizational change and organizational development is a big focus of what I do. I'm also on the executive team, so I'm a decision maker, I'm an influencer, I'm a leader within our organization and within the county and the community. So, you know, attracting and maximizing the talents of the workforce is kind of my official job, but I'm also a teacher and a facilitator and a coach. So that's a little bit about me and the work that I do.
Thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is, how can organizations use an equity framework to respond to the impacts of COVID-19 and prevent potential harm?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. How can organizations use an equity framework to respond to the impacts of COVID-19 and prevent potential harms?
I guess for me, one of the first things that's coming up is, and it is a part of a lesson about oppressive systems and why do crises fall on certain communities harder. But there's been a lot of conversation about the impact to the Black community in the U.S. and COVID and increased infection rates, increased death rates, things like that. And so an equity, I distinguish between an equity framework and an anti-oppression equity framework, and really quickly about that is just like equity, you know, says we take into account the resource or the opportunity or the baseline we want people to reach, and we distribute resources based on then their needs, where folks are at. So that's the difference between equity and equality. Equality, everyone gets the same thing. Equity, you're taking into account some of those circumstances. Anti-oppression says we also want to take into account the history that different communities, what have those communities experienced, which will inform why certain entire communities are getting more impacted, not just on the individual level, but on the community level. And then additionally, are the folks directly affected by systems, by processes, are they included? Are they actually at the decision-making table? And then how are we dismantling systemic barriers? So even just thinking about what communities are going to be the most at risk in the pandemic, well, what communities are going to be facing racial bias or bias in the medical industry? And there are several communities that we could talk about that. What communities are make up the majority of service workers, of frontline workers? Who are those demographics? Like, you have to think about the people who are going to be most economically, politically, socially at risk due to the shifting dynamics of the pandemic, what might those risks be? What are some of those additional needs that might be that they might be getting impacted by through COVID? Those are some of the things organizations need to consider, because now what resources you need to have to support more marginalized members of your workforce or your community, there are different implications to that now. So I think people need to think about, like, structurally, you need to think structurally, what is going to be at risk or what is going to be an issue in my community. And I guess the question is, the failure of multiple systems means the solutions need to be done with multiple systems thinking about each other. So again, how are workplaces talking with school districts about the interplay between work hours, school hours, things like that? How are multiple government institutions are facing budget shortfalls? How are we going to address that statewide to say, well, what do we need to make sure is funded so that, like in Colorado, public transportation, our public transportation RTD was already like crumbling, had low ridership, and now public transportation and folks being able to get around with unemployment numbers and with needing to be able to get to the doctor, and folks being economically more strained. Folks need to be able to be sure that they can get where they need to go with some sort of public system. Is that funding being considered as important as other funding? All of these conversations need to happen, where we're thinking of this as, again, the community, the society that we're in. How do all these structures need to work together to support everyone, to support those especially who are most marginalized? That's, to me, how you should be applying the principles of equity to analyzing this. Like, what is actually happening? What is my role as an individual, as an organization, to augment resources and access in my community, and for my and for employees, workforce? And think broadly about also what your constituency or your stakeholders as an organization. So the stakeholders of your organization are not just your employees, it's also the vendors, folks you have contracts with, it's also your customers and clients, it's also the community members around where your organization sits. So think broadly about what do the stakeholders involved in my organization, what are they going to need, what are going to be some of the risks, how do we restructure our organization to address some of those things through an equity lens?
Yeah, something that that's kind of bringing me to our first question, and a point that you were saying as well, Regan, is around accessibility. I think like right now is a really important time for us to really determine in our workplaces is what we are trying to do accessible, and are we right, like including within the things that we see as part of the work time and space that allows people to be supported with the ways that they are processing various forms of trauma. For example, as like Sandie was saying, right, mental health and being such a crucial role and component, that's always true. Long before we had a pandemic, right, we were facing other sorts of crisis. And it's really important for us to recognize that residual trauma or firsthand trauma that employees are experiencing is something that needs to have time and space, that isn't after work hours, that isn't an aside, but actually something that could be built into the culture of our organizations. And I've seen, organizations that are implementing this right now who already have a framework. And I think that we can learn from them, such as Resilient Futures. Another organization that comes to mind is RISE, which does some education organizing in Aurora, Colorado. Along with that, when I think about accessibility, there's many of us who are also caretakers for our families, right? Who have immunocompromised systems. Maybe you have that yourself. There's just such a huge spectrum of things that are not seen necessarily traditionally in the workplace. And I think that there really should be a moment of assessment around are we allowing the opportunity for this person who obviously has the qualifications and skills to perform this work to also hold the other responsibilities that they have in their life, and create an environment that allows for both of those things to exist, because like one can ever exist without the other. And a few other things that are coming to mind to me in relation to this question is just overall in the fact that we live in a dominant culture that is very quick to be disposable and ready to say that, you know, the pandemic is over, right? Like there's a lot of things that even at our local government and state government level that have put aside precautions around what we know is best right now to keep our communities safe and healthy in regards to social distancing, potentially not working in the office. And so I think, again, when you, at least as someone who has been in management and as a director, I would think about what is my decision-making power and ability to make sure that the well-being of my team extends to many different areas, right? Like not just the well-being of how well are we getting the work done, because the work, it will always be there and it will happen. But if folks are like too much in a state of trauma, or they're too stressed because they aren't able to take care of their family members or themselves, then it's going to make it nearly impossible. Which brings me to my last point, and part of, I think as well, what, you know, Regan was uplifting. We have to examine all the systems, and that includes the infrastructure of the systems within our own workplace. Like right now, you know, I'm a sole member of Celesté Alegría, of my company, and it's really important to me that I align myself with other organizations that are as small as me, as well as considered small businesses in Colorado, and connecting with those types of organizations to advocate for policies at the state level that will make it possible and affordable for me to have access to benefits, as well as advocate for that for the future employees that I hope to have as my business continues to grow. And so I think that's the other component here, is really considering all angles. But when I think about the workplace, like what is my decision-making power? What am I responsible for? And if my health insurance is too expensive for my employees to actually use, then I should reassess that and do something about it as soon as possible, right? Because that is something that can have an immediate impact and allow us to move out of crisis mode and into a more grounded space to be able to do the work well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Celeste. There were a few questions. Could you, just a quick follow-up, can you repeat the two organizations you mentioned? One of them was RISE and the other one was Resilient.
Resilient Futures. Mm-hmm.
Resilient Futures?
Yes, they do trauma-informed training here in the metro area, but since we're in this virtual world, I know that they're getting requests from out of state too, so Resilient Futures.
Thank you.
I would only add a couple of things to all the great things that we've just heard. I think having a framework has been helpful for the organization that I support. You know, having a framework, having an equity statement, having a strategy, having it embedded in our mission and our vision and our core values. So in the initial crisis of the disruption caused by the pandemic, we had a plan that we were able to rely on, fall back on, right? So even in crisis mode, as people were scrambling, we were able to pivot because we did have some guiding principles that were guiding us forward. You know, we knew our why. We knew why we were doing what we were doing and what we wanted to achieve. We knew how to measure our success and who to share that with. We had already figured out, you know, what structural challenges we had and what systemic challenges we had and what training to offer. So we had something to fall back on. So having a plan is really helpful. And I've been looking at equity frameworks of other organizations, and the one I want to mention that has really impressed me, and it was something, you know, that existed before this current conglomeration of crises, was Portland Prosper. If you want an example of a beautiful equity framework, look at Portland Prosper. It's really inspirational what they did there, because I think what we need right now is like meaningful and long-lasting action to create change, right? And that requires strategic vision and intent. And it requires us to show up differently. And so our equity framework helps us to know how to show up. So it's like focused on doing right rather than being right, leaning into your humanity, being willing to have those courageous conversations and open the dialogue, and making sure everybody's got a voice, right? Whether that's within your workplace, within your communities, reaching out and connecting with those other organizations and those community partners, because this is a really complex problem. And so it's going to take a really complex response, and it's going to take all of us, right? None of us have the answers. And the people experiencing inequity are the experts. So are we listening to them? Do we know when to lead and when to step aside and let somebody else lead? Like an equity framework can help you do those things the right way if you've already got a plan in place. And if you haven't, like, stop making the business case for us, just do it. Like go look at the great work other people are doing. Do you have experts on staff? Do you have experts in leadership positions, on your governing bodies in your communities? There are experts out there. There are consultants like the ladies that we're talking to today. You know, bring people in to help to do the work, because it's going to take all of us to figure out the way forward.
Absolutely, that is critical. And someone mentioned in the chat about like leadership and needing representation in there. And I think that's also something worth noting is, you know, as you are thinking about some of these consultants and leadership, like who are they, how are they related to the work, and what impact they have. So the next question, what vision do you have for a post-COVID society, if that indeed is possible? And what would equity look like? So for example, what are specific and new examples of transformational work within organizations that you as panelists are seeing or plan to do during this time of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter? And that was kind of a long question, so I'll drop it in the chat box too.
Thank you. I need to see that. Oh, there we go. But the first, like, I don't know, a post-COVID society, like I love like talking about visioning and where are we going in terms of stuff that's uplifting. And I really think this is the time for folks to like start envisioning that. So my pie in the sky sort of stuff. First of all, no healthcare tied to employment, because guess what? That inherently doesn't make sense. So we actually have to have universal healthcare. Universal basic income. What if everyone had a base level of income where they could make rent payments, they could buy food, they could buy clothing, they could travel based on we have a collective societal like benefits. Like, what is all this? Like, our economy is good, we're making money, that was the claim, but for the benefit of who? Like, none of these businesses who are making billions of dollars, I'm sure many of you have been shocked about how many of them applied for the small business loans, how many got transferred. We still don't know where that major transfer of $500 billion, we still don't know where what companies all that money went to. And that was a separate program from the small loan program, where we see a bunch of organizations. So you're making billions and billions of dollars, you're making all this money as institutions, and yet that didn't seem to protect you or stabilize you in terms of the COVID economy. So who is all of this money for? Why don't we start making money as a nation? Why don't we actually distribute that money to our citizens so that we have a baseline standard of living for everyone? And just those two policies would totally transform our society. Just those two policies. That's why I'm just like, I got the solutions, and it's easy, and we can get rid of other programs, because universal basic income is a catch-all for those sort of things. Where's that level of thinking and creativity? I don't see Joe Biden talking about that. I don't see Nancy Pelosi talking about that. I don't see the level of leadership and actual decision making that we need to say we have to build a new society, and a society that functions better. In the United States specifically, we're having a harder time. We're going to have a harder time doing this than other nations. The conversation about anti-Black racism and racism, this is the reason we don't have a class revolution already in this country, why we don't have the proliferation of unions and labor and us being united as people being crushed by these systems. If you want to know why that has happened, racism and sexism and heterosexism and homophobia, these other oppressive systems have been used to divide and prevent a class coalition from forming. So really, we could be doing multiple things at once, because once we're talking about racism, more people will start to understand that that is a that the very existence of racism was purposefully used as a system of exploitation and oppression, but used as a wedge to prevent us from getting the things that we need, from caring about each other in the ways that we need to, from building a society where we are prosperous and we're thriving. Are we actually going to build that society in the United States now? That's what I'm excited about a post-COVID vision. And then the question is, how does my workplace organization, what is the piece of, or the role that we're going to play in that? Can you imagine if organizations or businesses formed a coalition to go to Congress and saying, yeah, employer-sponsored health coverage is not working, so y'all need to pass a bill because we're not engaging in that, or we're not going to cooperate with this. Think about the ways to use your power organizationally, or to build coalitions to help get the structural changes that you need. Like, every individual organization or business may not be able to create the types of structures that is really needed to support their employees. Then you need to be advocating to your state and to your national governments, what do you need to make sure your folks, your constituents are supported? Let's start looking at our power also in graduated levels, instead of every organization being like, I have to figure this out by myself. No, you don't. This is supposed to be what leaders and officials are supposed to be figuring out too. And y'all lobby the heck out of folks when you want a tax break. Now start lobbying for real structural and social change. And if we're doing that, I feel like we can make some real strides in a few years. And we need to make them to make sure that folks aren't dying and that there's not more harm being caused in the interim. So we got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. I think through the comments, if you have a chance to scroll through them, there are a lot of people that want to nominate you for president. So yes,
Right.
to everything that
I'm running in 2040, so I made the commitment. So give me 20 years and I'm going to try it out.
Oh, that's great. Celeste or Sandie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have a couple of things I'd like to add. That's a great question, by the way. And thank you for asking a question that you didn't give us time to prepare for, because like my brain went all over the place with that one. That was awesome.
I apologize.
I think, I love that. I'm dreaming about like radical change. Like a period of crisis like this should be the catalyst for radical change, right? So for me, what would that look like? It would look like affordable housing. Like, for goodness sake, we live in Colorado. Can we have affordable housing, right? Can we have universal health care? Remember, I came from a country that was all we had. And so this is a huge culture shock for somebody who moves from another part of the world, where you don't have to worry about the cost of getting sick, the cost of getting pregnant, the cost of dying. Like, for goodness sake, right? Stressors in people's lives, barriers that we can remove, right? Access that we can provide. Education is huge for me. When will there be universal, affordable education? And I'm not just talking about higher education, I'm talking about early childhood programs as well. Like, that's a big piece of my background. When will there be true inclusion around educational opportunities? So those are the things that I dream about. And I also think about the transformation of like institutional policies and practices. Like, is that a reality now? I mean, can we grasp at that, what it would look like to undo, to unlearn? Like, it's hard to learn, but it's harder to unlearn. But could we collectively now unlearn some of the practices that inadvertently perpetuate inequity? And could we do better as organizations around that? Are we willing, right, to take the risks and get it wrong and keep trying? Because I feel like this isn't a sprint anymore, this is a marathon. So we've got to like take a deep breath and like buckle in and be willing to like stay the course with this and just keep showing up and speaking up, and not be afraid to ask for that radical change that we need.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's already been said, and I think what's coming to mind for me is a few things. First, in this time, like, our imagination is crucial is so crucial in order for us to have this long-standing radical change that like Regan clearly gave us a clear sermon about. You know, Sandie is like continuing to uplift, like I'm very clear. And it just makes me think about actually a quote from a fellow organizer, Rosie Washington. When she said this, it totally shook my world, so I hope it does for you too. We are living inside of someone else's imagination. There are people who live about this being our reality, that our basic human needs are not even seen as rights. The fact, like, we don't need just housing, we like affordable housing, we need housing to be seen as a human right. We need universal income. We need healthcare to be seen as a human right. We need time to take care of our families. We need paid family medicine. We need so many things in this country that we do not have because of the origins of where we come from. And part of the imagination of where we come from is colonialism and white settlerism. It's really important for us to understand that, because the reason why people came here was in service of wealth building for a colony, for another country. It was not to create reinvestment in our own communities and have sustainable living. And that legacy continues to perpetuate itself. All of the foundation of what we've been built on, it continues to reiterate that, which is why we're seeing right now in this conversation around anti-Blackness, why it is so crucial for us to have that particular conversation. You know, there's a piece in the video that I prepared for this that I didn't get to include, and I wish I did that, but I'll just say it here. If we are not creating environments in our workplaces that not only are tolerable, they should not be tolerable. That is not the aim that what we are shooting for in this time when we're talking about equity. And what I mean by that is like the statements that say we're multiracial organization or corporation. That means that we tolerate multiple races and ethnicities at the table. What we need to do is be explicitly anti-racist. And in order to be anti-racist, we have to confront our anti-Blackness. And as a Chicana and a member of the Chicano community, like our anti-Blackness is so deep-seated to the way that conquest and colonization has impacted us, and it still lives in our minds, and it still is embodied in our culture, and it's much of the reason why we are not in deep unity in this moment as we should be with our Black siblings to get free. So my other big thing right now, along with like having your own imagination, is have an imagination with other people. And to do the hard work to be in deep relationship, like real deep relationship, not just like I have this one friend, but like I'm a part of a community and all members of my community are so important to me, and that their dignity is so important to me that I will do everything I can to ensure that their dignity is seen and that their life is respected and sacred. Part of, again, like what we are facing right now is that there is a disposability, there is a disdain towards our Black siblings, and that mentality, as well as towards our trans siblings and Black trans women who are putting forward an imagination of a world and what it would look like. I saw like Afrofuturism here in one of the comments, I think from the librarian group, like, you know, like that is crucial. We should follow your imagination, because that is really, to me, our path towards liberation. But it takes a lot for me to get to the point where I can actually follow your imagination and trust in it, right? And that means that I have to do my own work to be able to see that as the path to how we will get free. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
Laura, can I add something as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I just like, yeah, like I'm like, because Celeste, I feel like you're getting at the core. I mean, we need to start having conversations about the root of the problem, and so I feel like you're getting that, to be like, what are the roots that are causing this bad, like these bad results? There are broken and damaged roots that are the reason why we keep having these bad results over and over again. Because someone in the comments says something about, well, what about the people, if we have universal basic income, like what about the people who don't want to work or don't want to have a job? And I'm just like, think bigger than that. What if we thought of an economy not based on forcing people to work? Is like, what if jobs were based off of merit and interest? Aren't we building a more efficient society? What happened to our Star Trek vision of a utopian future where everyone doesn't need to have a job because there are technologies and creations that do most of the work, and therefore and we're not defining people's worth, people's value based on what they produce in a job. Even the 8-hour workday, the 40-hour work week, that is a construct. We came up with that to stop the 16-hour work week and the 20-hour work week. We came up with that construct so we had some semblance of work-life balance. What is the next evolution of our society and our economy? I can envision an economy where people work based on their interest and their skills, not because if I don't work these 2 jobs for $7.25 an hour, I literally cannot afford to have a roof over my head. We have created a makeshift economy based off of scarcity when we're getting more efficient and we're getting better at stuff. We could have a post-scarcity economy right now if we merely decided to have one. We could have one right now because we already have the technology and capabilities. That's what I mean by the vision. What is the next stage of our societies? What is a global society in which people are not being harmed but have their essential necessities met? What does a society like that look like? How do we actually start building towards that? So think broadly about I mean, even just another core question is even just being a human, just being alive, just figuring out your purpose, just reconciling with your own death and the death of your family, thinking about pain and loss, but also the joy and the amazing journey that you're on as a human. Do you feel like you have enough space and time to think about things like that, to enjoy your own existence? Do you feel like you have enough time? Because I can tell you, until 3 months ago, I did not feel like I have enough time. And now it's like my ability to think and put everything into this work, it feels liberating, but I'm also like, I want everyone to have this. I want everyone's needs to be met, and us to have time to just enjoy being alive and existing. We haven't envisioned a future like that. Mankind, the globe hasn't envisioned a future like that for ourselves. So we need to think broadly and more utopian about what we're trying to achieve as humanity, as people. And that could be in small communities all the way up to the biggest, largest global community, because we have to start thinking of ourselves as a global community as well. We are at the point where humankind as a whole is impacting the globe. When the president in Brazil says, I don't care about the Amazon rainforest being burned, and it has global impacts for weather and dust storms and for our global health, we have to start thinking of ourselves as a global community. And that question, what do we want to achieve that's good for everyone? What kind of structures do we want to build that is non-oppressive systems of justice, systems of joy? What would that actually look like on a global level? And then narrow that down to your community. And what do I want my community to look like? And then that's where your piece comes in. That's how I want us to challenge our thinking, because we've put ourselves into constructs that we don't need to maintain anymore. These constructs are not working. These systems are not working. It's time to build something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID has just shown how much disparity is occurring in everyone's situation, and really looking at like the root of the cause, and why do we keep doing the same thing? And if it's because that's our system and policy that's been in place for X amount of years, maybe we need to rethink that. So thank you, that was great. Sandie, I have a follow-up question for you. Can you give an example of how your equity framework at Jefferson County helped you respond to the COVID crisis?
Yes, there were a couple of things that we did right away. One of them was realize we needed to create agency for our workforce. Like suddenly they're dispersed, the libraries are closed, there's uncertainty, there's lack of information, there's fear, then suddenly, you know, there's job insecurity, there's financial insecurity, people don't know what the future holds. So one of the things I think we did really well was we organized, right? We created strike teams, and the strike teams were to take care of the important things. And one of the important things for me was psychological safety, and part of that was agency. So we actually created a strike team, and we called it the Staff Connections Strike Team. And it was people from all levels in the organization, all kinds of voices. And we tasked them, like, come up with a way to create agency. And they did fantastically creative things. They started doing daily WebEx events for staff with a whole host of topics. And some of it was just purely a chance to show up and see each other's faces and talk to each other and talk about what was going on in their lives. And then they had some self-care topics and some wellness and some fun. And then they created an employee-only Facebook group that people could go to connect. So we started to create affinity and a sense of belonging for staff. So that was one example of, I think, the way that having that framework around people are important, all people are important, are all voices being heard? You know, are we distributing decision-making and power equitably? Are we giving people the chance to have influence? It really made us think about people and think broadly about people when we started to respond to the crisis. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you all have touched a lot about different ideas. Can you share any resources or ways, suggest any resources or steps that people might be able to take so that they can begin forming their own action plans and within their organizations?
My favorite resource right now is, you know, this is a new one for me, and so I get really excited about the new thing. Is a project called Awake to Woke to Work, and I'm really intrigued by the framework that they created. They've described an equity cycle and then identified the levers that make the cogs in the wheel turn. And I just think this is beautiful work. It's Equity in the Center is the organization that sponsored this, and they describe these three levels of equity, of development for organizations, you know, that starting with figuring out how to wake to awareness of the issues, and then, you know, focusing on people first, and then getting to systems next. But it's beautiful. So if you're interested in looking at something that somebody else has done and using it as a starting point and not having to reinvent the wheel, right? Awake to Woke to Work, building a race equity culture is a beautiful resource. I would recommend that one.
Thank you. Celeste, Regan, do you have any action items that people can take towards, that they can do within their organizations?
Yeah, definitely. Plenty of action items. If you're interested, you know, in any of the programs that I offer, as well as actually just doing an assessment of how you can actually build in greater racial equity into the infrastructure and the culture of your organization, reach out to me. Right there, that's my role in community, and you can find me online. Everything is Celestial Alegria, but my website is www.celestialalegria.com. Two other action items, right, that you can support right now is if you identify as Latinx or Chicanx, I'm hosting a program that is starting here in a few weeks right now on confronting anti-Blackness. The first cohort is of 20 people, and if this is speaking to you and you want to really like dig deep in how you confront that for yourself in community, sign up for a free call with all information there, as well on all our platforms. And the third thing for folks who want to take action in tandem with this program that I am launching for confronting anti-Blackness, I'm also launching a reparations network through my business, because it is really important that as we take the time to do our internal work and to gather as our community to go deeper, it's also really important for us to take action, because it's not like our Black siblings' life is on pause while we're doing our work. And so you have the opportunity as well to invest in that. You know, my Venmo or PayPal, just write in reparations, and that actually will go to 10 different Black leaders, artists, and Black-led organizations here in Colorado that will support our community. Because at the end of the day, we need to create our own systems and our own understanding of economy, and reparations is a crucial part of that. If we are really going to establish the equities that we need in the future to have a joyous life, to have freedom, and all the many other things that have been said in this conversation.
Thank you, Sandie and Celesté, for those. And Celesté, thank you for your focus on reparations and forwarding that conversation on your end, because yeah, there's still an intense level of resistance to that, and I feel like all of us have to make strides to getting people comfortable with that conversation and then actually doing something about it in terms of individual organizations, communities, and at the national level. So thank you for your work on that. I will also, I will just add real quick that I am also myself a resource. So if you are interested in this anti-oppression perspective, I do anti-oppression trainings and consultations, specializing in anti-racism and anti-sexism. So doing organizational assessments. I tend to be very qualitative. I want to have interviews with folks. I want to look through things. I want to have organizational discussions about values. I do presentations that will transform your thinking about what are the roots of what are we really talking about? And it's this dehumanization piece that Celesté and I have been talking about. Like, this is the root problem of oppressive systems is dehumanization, trying to use people as resources, and that has never worked. It's never going to work. We have to paradigm shift how we look at people and how we think of people and their contributions to society. That has to be an entire paradigm shift. So I approach that with organizations. And then the last thing I will mention that I do, and then I'd like to mention one of the resources, is I do accountability partnerships. So if you've done a DEI project, if you've gotten some training, if you're just like, yeah, we have our plan, we need help executing our plan, we need a problem solver, a thought partner, something like that, then I offer accountability partnerships, and that's for ongoing processing, consultation, and support for the organization to meet their DEI goals. If you're interested in that, check out my website, reganbyrdconsulting.com, and then that shows more about my resources and services. Again, reganbyrdconsulting.com. I would say, since many of you are in different geographic locations, there's two things that I would say, like, look for in your area. So look for, first of all, most organizations do not have the knowledge or skills to do this work internally without an outside expert. So get your organization to commit to spending resources on, we need someone to help us plan through and think through this. Like, don't presume, oh, this is all just going to work out because we're all good people and we all love each other and we all care. That's not going to get you a strategic plan. It's not going to get you to action items. Just like you hire HR consultants, IT consultants, you need folks to come in and with the skills to help you do this work. So make an organizational time and resource commitment to doing this work. Look for folks in your local area that understand your cities or your states, like, specific issues. Because in Colorado, I have to talk to folks about a taxpayer bill of rights, and I have to talk to folks about other things that are unique in Colorado. There are folks who are experts in your communities who are like that. Look for those folks, and if you can't find them, talk to grassroots organizations, nonprofits. They will know some folks that you should get in contact with, and they are a resource in and of themselves. Understanding what community needs are, what is actually impacting their community members. Grassroots nonprofits have built-in advocacy mechanisms for surfacing issues, for understanding community needs. They will have some stuff that you can kind of piggyback off of or support or help resource. So if you're really just confused about where to go, look for your local experts in nonprofits or local DEI anti-oppression type consultants. Look for those resources so they can help you navigate and construct a plan for your organization and your community.
Yeah, thank you. Yes to everything that you all said. And I think we have time for one more. And before I get in there, just also thinking about equity and resources, encourage people to fill out the census. That's, a lot where that can make a huge impact in our community. So if you have the ability, please encourage communities to fill out their census. Just throwing that out there. So we have time for one last question, which I think everyone could agree, I feel like we could just sit in this room forever. How can we foster healing within our organizations? Are there any suggestions for how to get leadership to prioritize caring for their staff in the midst of all the crises? And I'll drop that in chat.
I love this question. This is something I think organizations have always struggled with, right? For me, this is about people being willing to bring their heart to work with them every day and listen to its wisdom, right? One of the tools that I use when I'm coaching is called the Enneagram, and it talks about how human intelligence lives in different places, and it isn't all just about the top 6 inches. So I think being willing to just be more human is really important in heart-based decisions. I think when you have to be willing right now, this is the perfect time, the perfect storm where like the whole world is watching us, wondering what we're going to do about it, right? And our children are watching us, wondering what we're going to do about it. And so we have this unique opportunity to do something amazing here. But it's going to take us like using our whole selves, our hearts and our souls and our bodies, as well as our brains, to figure out where to go from here. So for me, it's like ask, listen, learn. Ask, listen, learn. Don't be afraid to ask a stupid question and look foolish and learn something, right? Those courageous conversations. How do we open that dialogue and get all the voices heard and have the right people at the table? Like you can make fast decisions in crisis, and they can be good decisions if you've got the right people in the room, even if it's a virtual room, right? So look at where you have power and authority and decision making in your organization and do that really well.
Yes, for this question, like healing is such an important aspect to my work. Of course, with like my individual clients through coaching, but also in how I approach transformation with organization. Transformation is a natural part, change is a natural part of our world. And I think oftentimes when we think about transition, think about change, we're in these moments of crisis, fear is what guides us, right? And so I think in this particular question, right, it's like, how do I get leadership in my organization to recognize or value healing? My invitation to you is to lean on healing practices that are important to you. Take that moment to have a breath in the middle of the conversation that is tense or difficult. Like, what you need beside you right now, right? Like I even have some of my stones with me because that's important, right? Energy for me in my practice and part of what I do. And the other thing I would say is, especially for the Black, Indigenous people of color on this call, there are many rituals that support our healing. And some of us are deeply connected to that, and others of us are not so connected to that. Wherever you are in that spectrum and in that journey, those are accessible to you. There are spaces that are constantly inviting us to come together for our own healing. So to me, it's crucial that if you want people to see your healing as valuable, do you see your own healing as valuable? How are you making space for your healing? Are you investing in that time? Like what are the actions you are taking to let people know that this is a crucial part of your life, and a toxic work environment that doesn't support your healing is not where you need to be. So those are some of the pieces I would say. Lean into your ritual, make space for your healing, and trust in your own wisdom of what you need in the moment of when things are happening, and let that be present throughout the culture of your organization, because that in itself will form a lot for people to see your dignity in a new way.
That's beautiful, Celeste. And I wonder about, when we talk about healing, people don't prioritize healing unless they recognize that there was hurt, right? So is there something intentional now we can do to recognize hurt? I mean, I think one of the nicest ways I've ever heard this described is that we all walk through life and walk through the world and experience the world. And all around us are these invisible doorways. And some people slide right through them and don't even know they're there. And some people don't know they're there until they run up against a locked door. And so if you're sliding through the doorway, you don't see somebody else running up against a locked door. And if we're not all willing to see the doors that are not open to everybody and find ways to unlock those doors, we don't acknowledge the hurt, and so there's no need for healing. Then we don't see healing as a priority. But right now, there's a heap of hurt, and how can we help people see it, embrace it, take responsibility, like get from allyship to ownership? Like, what's my role in this? Am I in the stands cheering, or am I down on the field playing? Right? Like, get to ownership of this. This is everybody's problem, and we all have an opportunity to be part of some solutions, but it's going to take acknowledgement of the hurt.
Yes, thank you. Regan? I'm gonna throw you the ball.
Yeah, I was just kind of like processing and listening. I think that I'm coming from this from a couple of different places. So broadly, some recommendations for everyone is the first conversation you may need to have at your organization is, hey, like, folks are not okay. You seem to not be addressing that, or we're not okay. We need to take a pause and have a conversation about what are people needing now? What does this work environment need to be now to meet people's needs? Because again, like I was there, I was working for another organization earlier in this year, and just like this we're going to maintain the same level of productivity, and we're still going to do 8-hour work weeks, and we're still doing this, and occasionally getting, a floating holiday or some extra acknowledgement. But I'm like, this expectation about our workplaces are going to be doing exactly what they would be doing, but remotely amid multiple crises, is not realistic. And if folks are not doing okay, demand that your organization pause and say, this is what me and my coworkers are feeling or experiencing. And try to go through your channels, but disrupt those channels if those are not working. To be like, I went to HR and they didn't care, went to my supervisor, they didn't care, so now I'm bringing this up in the staff meeting. Now I'm talking about it so everyone can see that I'm bringing this up. And have it be, and name that it's coming from a place of harm. I am not okay. I'm being harmed by this dynamic that we have. That needs to be the first conversation an organization has, oftentimes. And if your organization is not prepared even to do that, then the next case would be get a third party that can protect you in to have that conversation. So if you can get your organization to agree, well, we need to do a diversity, equity, inclusion training. We need someone to come in and help us rethink these systems. You can let that person know this is what's happening, and that the person you hire can be an advocate for staff in a different way. I ask questions like that all the time to say, what's really going on behind the background? What do you really need me to know in a way that I can protect you and advocate for you as someone who's been hired to challenge and surface these things as an organization? So try to get them to at least hire someone to say, we need someone to bring someone in here to do that, and then tell that person what's going on, and they can say, this isn't okay. This is one of the organizational systems we need to work on to fix how folks are feeling and operating within the workplace. On a more personal note, I have depression. I have anxiety. I have walked out of workplaces suicidal because I didn't know if I was still going to have my job, if I was still going to be okay. That's what I mean about our workplaces being sources of trauma. Even just the notion that people can hold your livelihood over their head, and that's an organizational power dynamic that rarely gets acknowledged. But yeah, to be like, are you aware of how much anxiety happens when, like, I am asked to come into a supervisor room and we're closing the door and all that? We don't even have to have conversations like that, but organizations just churn along and presume that these things are okay, or these things are okay ways to conflict resolve, to get people on the same page, when we could have a much more humanizing hey, we all came together to accomplish a mission. How are we going to do that together? And what support do you need in order to do that well? We can have a totally different dynamic in our organizations that I feel like we actually have to think through. So organizations need to take the care of their employees seriously. And if they can't do that, employees need to advocate for themselves. And it may require, there's 698 people on the call. So this will be a little weird for me to say, keep this like in the back of your mind, but sometimes we literally have to subvert our organizational systems that are harming us. And what that means is, unionizing behind the back of your organization, really talking to other employees about hey, we have rights, and this is legal to do, but most organizations would discourage it, or we don't want you to go there. But that's actually a problem and a concern. Workers, you talking to your fellow employees and saying, how are you doing? Do we need to organize together to build our power in this organization, to be at the decision-making table? And that's what organizations need to start doing, whether it's voluntarily you let folks do it or we have to demand it. But we need to be at the decision-making table as workers and as employees about decisions that affect us and the work environment. And if it's harming us as employees, the work environment, we need to be at those decision-making tables too. So it shouldn't just be top-down decision-making. How are we getting integrated into how we're transforming this organization? Take that conversation to leadership, and if it's still not working, start organizing with your fellow employees or workers around that, because you have protections, you have rights. Talk to a local labor organization, talk to other folks who can say, yeah, you can assert your rights in an organization even if it's resistant from leadership. And that may be what we need to start doing. Again, we've done it before, but if organizations are not getting it, we have to put our foot down. Folks are suffering, folks are dying, the folks are going to be impacted by this pandemic for years. And if organizations are just like, okay, if you get churned through the meat grinder and you can't handle it, that's fine. We're still doing this and we're still producing this. That's not going to be okay. It's not going to work. So we need to put the brakes on that, and let's do that in whatever ways we can. We can do it through existing systems. We can do it outside existing systems, but this is what has to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Well, I think we are getting close to time. I'm going to see if Ozzy is available to come back on. Ozzy, are you around?
Yes. Hi. I will briefly hop back in. Thank you all for such a powerful conversation. That was truly amazing. There are some comments about the racial healing circles that I'm happy to speak more in depthly with folks if you want to email me in the next couple of weeks. But one of the things that we've been doing at DPL is holding space for individuals who identify as BIPOC to just be in a virtual community together. We breathe together, we meditate, we vent together, we talk, we name the harm that we're facing, and we share our strategies for survival so that we feel seen, we feel heard, and we find ways to move through that, right? Because part of the work that we're doing is to create and change these systems, but we also still have to mitigate the real harm that folks are facing every day. And so that's one of the things that I have been really grateful to be a part of and to help facilitate with DPL. And I can share more about that in the emails, and my background is also social work. I'm a macro social worker technically, but I focus specifically around racial healing and racial equity. And so that's one of the passion projects of mine. But thank you all for coming. This again will be recorded and on our YouTube, but also on the symposium site. Thank you, Laura, for moderating for us. And we will see you all in the next session, which will be the EDI Jeopardy game on Zoom. So take care, be well, everyone.
Bye, thank you. You all did wonderful. Thank you.